The morning air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you left the house. It was October in Brattleboro, Vermont, when the fog rolled in from the Connecticut River and turned the streets into a grey blur. Parents gathered in the parking lot of Greenfield Middle School, watching as their children climbed into the bright yellow school bus parked out front. Excitement buzzed among the kids, their voices cutting through the quiet morning like tiny bells. They were going to Molly Stark State Park for a day of hiking and learning about the changing leaves, an annual trip that everyone in town looked forward to. At the center of it all stood Margaret Reynolds, or Miss Maggie, as her students called her. 32 years old, with chestnut hair tied in a loose braid and an ever-present cardigan wrapped around her shoulders, she was the kind of teacher kids adored and parents trusted. She greeted each child by name as they boarded, kneeling to tie a shoelace or adjusting a backpack strap. "It's going to be a beautiful day for exploring," she said with a warm smile, though the clouds above suggested otherwise. Jason Miller, the oldest in the group at 13, grinned as he climbed aboard. "You're sure it won't rain, Miss Maggie?" "Positive," she said, winking. "And even if it does, that's just part of the adventure." Emma Clark, a quiet 12-year-old with wide, anxious eyes, lingered by the steps. Maggie knelt beside her. "You'll stick close to me, all right? Nothing to worry about." Emma nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. As the last of the kids boarded, Rachel and Ryan Cooper, the inseparable 12-year-old twins who were already bickering, Maggie turned to face the cluster of waiting parents. "I promise you," she said, her voice carrying over the idle chatter, "your kids will come back safe and sound. We'll take good care of them." It wasn't the first time she'd said those words, but for some reason they settled deeper this time. A few parents even laughed lightly, waving as the bus door shut. At 8:03 a.m., the bus pulled away, tires hissing on the damp asphalt, and disappeared down Route 9. No one knew it then, but that was the last time they'd ever see their children, or Margaret Reynolds. By noon, parents expecting a call from their kids' cell phones were instead met with silence. By 1:30, when the school bus was due back, there was still no sign of it. At first, they told themselves it was just a delay, maybe traffic or a stop for lunch. But when 2 hours passed without any word, panic began to seep in. The first call to the police came from Sarah Miller, Jason's mother. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "My son is missing. They're all missing. Please, you need to do something." By late afternoon, the Brattleboro Police Department had issued an alert. Officers drove the winding back roads toward Molly Stark State Park, expecting to find the bus broken down or parked at some trailhead, but it wasn't there. It was Officer Tom Greeley who first spotted it. A yellow bus, abandoned at a rest stop 15 miles from town. The engine was off, the doors unlocked, and the inside empty. Maggie's jacket lay draped over the driver's seat. Detective Samuel Harris, a Boston investigator brought in to help, stood inside the bus, scanning the rows of seats. "No signs of struggle," he muttered. "They just left." Back in town, panic gripped the community. Parents gathered at the school gymnasium, faces pale and eyes red from tears. Some demanded answers, while others clung to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding. "Where are they?" Sarah Miller sobbed, clutching her husband's arm. "They were supposed to be safe." Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered about kidnappers. Others suggested Maggie had taken the children and run away, but those who knew her rejected the idea outright. "She'd never do that," Laura Reynolds, Maggie's younger sister, insisted. "She loved those kids." By nightfall, the gymnasium felt like a tomb. The parents sat in silence, united by fear and grief. Detective Harris stood before them, his voice steady but grim. "We're doing everything we can to bring them home. I promise you, we won't stop until we find them." Yet even as he spoke, the weight of the unknown pressed on everyone in the room. Where had they gone? And why did the trail already feel so cold? Before we go deeper into this chilling story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss more gripping mysteries like this one. The bus was found, but Maggie and the children had vanished without a trace. And for Brattleboro, that was only the beginning. By sunrise the next morning, Brattleboro no longer felt like the same quaint New England town where people left their doors unlocked and waved to one another at the market. Police cruisers lined Main Street, helicopters circled the outskirts, and volunteers fanned out into the misty woods that bordered Route 9. The October fog clung stubbornly to the valleys, making even the most familiar paths feel menacingly unfamiliar. Detective Samuel Harris had barely slept. A veteran from Boston, he had seen kidnappings before, but something about this one gnawed at him. 8 kids and a teacher don't just disappear, he said quietly to Officer Tom Greeley as they stood by the abandoned bus. Somebody knows what happened. The rest stop was eerily quiet, save for the hum of generators powering searchlights. Officers combed the area, marking tire tracks and collecting anything that could be evidence, though there was surprisingly little. No broken glass, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as though Maggie Reynolds and her students had simply walked off the bus and into the fog. Back at the gymnasium, parents sat in folding chairs, staring blankly at the stage where officials gave updates that felt more like rehearsed condolences. Sarah Miller had lost her voice from crying, while Emma Clark's father paced the floor, muttering prayers under his breath. Laura Reynolds stood apart from the crowd, arms crossed tightly. Her sister wasn't reckless. Maggie was the responsible one, the planner, the protector. The idea that she could have hurt those kids, or herself, was unthinkable, but every hour that passed chipped away at Laura's certainty. She'd never run off, Laura said when Harris approached her. You don't know her. Maggie would do anything for those children. Harris nodded, his gaze steady. Then we find them. But I need you to tell me, did she mention anything unusual before the trip? Any arguments? Strange behavior? Laura hesitated, remembering a conversation they'd had a few days before the disappearance. Maggie had seemed distracted, even frightened. When Laura pressed her, she just laughed it off, saying she'd been tired from work. Laura hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now it felt like a glaring omission. There was something off, Laura admitted. She didn't want to talk about it. As Harris took notes, a volunteer entered the gym, bringing a gust of cold air and more bad news. The search teams had covered the first 5 miles of trails around Molly Stark State Park and found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, nothing. By noon, the FBI had joined the investigation. Agents questioned the bus driver, who swore Maggie had insisted on driving herself that morning, and began interviewing everyone who had seen the group in the days leading up to the trip. The children's classmates spoke of how excited they'd been, how Maggie had promised it would be a day they'd never forget. The phrase, innocent at the time, now felt chilling. The search expanded into the nearby woods, with teams trudging through mud and brambles, shouting the children's names into the dense silence. Dogs sniffed for scent trails, but they kept losing them near the rest stop, as though whatever happened had happened quickly and cleanly. "Do you think they were taken?" Officer Greeley asked, as he and Harris stood overlooking the search zone. Harris stared into the endless forest. "If they were, someone planned this. You don't make 8 kids and a teacher disappear without leaving a trace." Back in town, frustration and fear began boiling over. Some parents openly blamed Maggie. "She took them," one father shouted in the gym. "She's hiding them from us." Laura bristled at the accusation, stepping forward. "My sister is not a kidnapper. She would never hurt them." If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at whoever did this. The divide between parents grew as theories swirled. runaway kids, an abduction ring, even whispers of cult activity. Every possibility felt worse than the last. That night, Harris addressed the families again. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the exhaustion beneath. "We are working around the clock. I know this feels like an endless nightmare, but we will find them. I give you my word." Yet in the quiet that followed, no one seemed comforted. As darkness settled over Brattleboro once more, the fog thickened and the town held its breath. Somewhere out there, Maggie Reynolds and 8 children had vanished into the Vermont wilderness. Whether they were lost, hiding, or taken by someone with far darker intentions remained a question no one could yet answer. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Brattleboro for decades to come. 25 years passed, but for Brattleboro the wounds never closed. The town moved on outwardly. New businesses opened, new families arrived, but for those who had been there in 1998, the shadow of that October day clung like a stain that wouldn't wash away. The gymnasium where parents had once waited for news was now used for basketball games and school plays, but for some, even driving by the building was unbearable. For Daniel Harris, the case wasn't just a haunting story from his childhood. It was part of his family's legacy. His father, Detective Samuel Harris, had led the investigation, spending years chasing every lead, every rumor, until the case eventually went cold. Daniel had been only 7 when it happened, but he remembered the long nights when his father came home looking defeated, sitting at the kitchen table in silence. "Some things," Samuel had told him once, "stick with you no matter how much time passes." Now 32, Daniel worked as a journalist for a popular online true crime publication. Unlike his father, Daniel didn't wear a badge, but he carried the same relentless hunger for answers. He specialized in cold cases, digging into forgotten tragedies that others had abandoned. But none fascinated him more than the Brattleboro disappearance, the one case that had defined his father's career and left his family with more questions than answers. When he received a call from an old family friend about an estate sale at the Reynolds home, Daniel knew it wasn't coincidence. Laura Reynolds, Maggie's younger sister, had decided to sell off much of what was left in her family's house. After years of holding on, she was finally letting go, or at least trying to. The Reynolds home was a modest 2-story farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields gone to seed. The once bright blue shutters were faded, the garden overgrown. Daniel knocked on the weathered door, and Laura, now in her late 50s, greeted him. Her hair, once dark like Maggie's, was streaked with grey, but her eyes held the same fierce determination he remembered from news clips decades ago. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly. "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel replied. "I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." Laura led him through the house, each room feeling like a time capsule from the late 90s. Dusty school photos of Maggie's students, stacks of books she'd used for lesson plans, even a faded flyer for the ill-fated field trip still pinned to a corkboard. In the attic they found it, an old cedar chest with tarnished brass hinges. It had been Maggie's, Laura explained. She hadn't opened it in years, unable to face the possibility of what might be inside. Daniel crouched beside it, running his hand over the carved initials MR on the lid. "Do you mind if I—" Laura hesitated, then nodded. Inside, among folded sweaters and keepsakes, was a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. Daniel's pulse quickened as he carefully lifted it out. Maggie Reynolds's handwriting filled the first few pages, neat, looping letters, like she'd written them in a rush, but wanted them to be understood. "She kept journals," Laura said quietly, almost to herself. "I thought they were just lesson notes or... I don't know. But I couldn't bring myself to read them." Daniel opened to the last dated entry, October 11th, 1998, the day before the trip. His breath caught as he read Maggie's words. "Something isn't right. I see him everywhere, near the school, at the grocery store, always watching. I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but I can't shake the feeling that we're in danger. If anything happens, I need to be strong for the kids." The next pages were more erratic, some torn out entirely. The last one ended mid-sentence. "If anything happens, know that I did what I had to do to keep them safe." Daniel stared at the unfinished line. It felt like the echo of a scream that had never reached anyone's ears. Laura's voice trembled. "What does that mean?" "Who was she talking about?" Daniel closed the diary gently. "I don't know yet, but this changes everything." For the first time in decades, there was something new, something that might finally explain what happened to Maggie Reynolds and those children, and Daniel Harris wasn't going to let it slip away. Daniel spent that night at a motel off Route 9, unable to bring himself to leave Brattleboro. He sat on the edge of the bed, with Maggie's diary laid out before him, the pages brittle beneath his fingers. It wasn't just a collection of thoughts. It was a window into a woman who had carried a fear she hadn't dared to share with anyone, not even her sister. The early entries were ordinary. Lesson plans, funny things the kids had said in class, lists of errands. But as the weeks drew closer to that fateful October, Maggie's tone shifted. "He's back. The same man I saw near the park last spring, always at a distance, pretending to be casual, but I know better. The children don't notice him, but I do." "I don't think he knows I've seen him." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Who was he? A stalker, someone from the community? He kept reading, his heart sinking with every word. "I told Laura I was just tired. That was a lie. I don't want her involved in this. It's my responsibility to keep the kids safe. I think I'm being followed. If I go to the police, they'll just tell me I'm overreacting. But I can't shake the feeling that something is coming." The most recent entries were jagged and rushed, written as if Maggie had been scribbling between hurried glances over her shoulder. "They don't believe me. No one does. I see him near the school bus now. I know what he's planning. I can't let him take them. I won't." Daniel ran his hand over the ink, smudged in places as if Maggie had written through tears. When he reached the final page, he read the unfinished line again. "If anything happens, know that I did what I had to do to keep them safe." The abrupt end felt deliberate, like she'd been interrupted. The next morning, Daniel returned to the Reynolds house. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, staring out the window at the overgrown garden. She looked up when he walked in, her eyes bloodshot but determined. "Did you read it all?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "There's a lot in there. Maggie was scared, Laura. She thought someone was after her and the kids." Laura gripped her mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. "But she didn't tell me. She never said a word. Why wouldn't she tell me? Maybe she didn't want to worry you. Or maybe—" Daniel hesitated. "Maybe she didn't trust anyone, not even the police." Laura bristled. She trusted people. She trusted the system. Daniel gently placed the diary on the table between them. "Do you trust that system now?" 25 years later, and they still don't know what happened." Laura didn't answer. Before Daniel could say more, his phone buzzed. An email notification. No subject line, no name. Just a single sentence. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." He felt his pulse quicken. "Great," he muttered. Laura frowned. "What is it?" "Nothing," Daniel lied, slipping the phone back into his pocket. But inside, alarms were blaring. Someone out there didn't want this case reopened. That night, Daniel sat in his car outside the motel, staring at the diary in the passenger seat. Every instinct told him this wasn't just a relic of the past. This was evidence, evidence someone might kill to keep buried. He flipped through the back pages again, noticing for the first time that some had been torn out cleanly. Someone had deliberately removed parts of Maggie's story. But who? The question gnawed at him until exhaustion pulled him under. When he woke up, the first thing he did was call a contact at the Vermont State Police. "I need to talk to someone about reopening a case," he said. "It's about Brattleboro, 1998, and I have something you'll want to see." For the first time in decades, the mystery of Maggie Reynolds wasn't just haunting Brattleboro. It was alive again, dangerously alive. Daniel didn't wait for permission. He drove straight to the Vermont State Police headquarters in Montpelier, gripping Maggie's diary like it was a lifeline. Inside, the sterile walls and buzzing fluorescent lights did nothing to calm the storm brewing in his chest. He gave his name at the front desk and asked for someone in the cold case division. After what felt like an eternity, a young woman in a dark blazer approached him. "Daniel Harris." "That's me." She extended her hand. "Detective Kelly Grant. I heard you wanted to talk about Brattleboro." Daniel studied her for a moment, late 20s, sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "You know the case?" "I grew up hearing about it. My dad was on the original search team." She gave a small, grim smile. "You could say it's one of the reasons I became a cop." Daniel slid the diary across the table in the conference room where she led him. "This belonged to Maggie Reynolds. I think it's time someone takes another look at what happened." Kelly flipped through the entries, her face tightening as she read Maggie's words about being followed, watched, and dismissed. "This isn't nothing," she murmured. "These are red flags." She knew something was coming. "She didn't just vanish," Daniel said firmly. "She was trying to protect those kids. And she wasn't paranoid. Someone was after them." Kelly leaned back, processing. If what she wrote is true, then this wasn't a random disappearance. It was premeditated. Daniel nodded. "And someone's still trying to keep it buried. I've been getting anonymous emails, threats telling me to stop digging." Kelly's eyebrows rose. "So either you're onto something, or you're rattling someone who wants this case to stay closed." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 25 years of unanswered questions filling the room. Finally, Kelly spoke. "I'll reopen the file, unofficially for now. But if we're doing this, we do it carefully. People have had a long time to cover their tracks. Careful doesn't solve cold cases," Daniel said. "Reckless doesn't either," Kelly countered. Her words stung, but Daniel knew she was right. The next few days were a blur of interviews and file reviews. Kelly granted Daniel limited access to the original case documents, photographs of the bus, witness statements, search maps. He spent hours combing through them, finding details that had been overlooked or dismissed. One thing stood out. Several witnesses reported seeing a dark green pickup near the rest stop on the day of the disappearance, but it had never been identified. When Daniel brought this up to Kelly, she tapped her pen against her notebook. "If Maggie saw the same truck near the school, that could be our guy. But after this much time, finding that vehicle won't be easy." "Nothing about this is easy," Daniel replied. They arranged to meet Laura Reynolds again. She was reluctant, clearly torn between her need for closure and the fear of tarnishing Maggie's memory. "You're sure this is worth reopening?" she asked as they sat in her kitchen. Daniel nodded. "If Maggie was protecting those kids, don't you want people to know? Don't you want her name cleared?" Laura's eyes glistened. "Of course I do. But what if the truth isn't what we want it to be? What if she wasn't who we thought she was?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Then at least we'll know. Isn't that better than living with questions?" Laura turned to Kelly, her voice low. "And if you find out my sister was complicit in this somehow?" Kelly hesitated before answering. "Then we follow the evidence, wherever it leads." The conversation ended there, but Daniel could feel Laura's unease simmering beneath the surface. That night, as he left Laura's house, Daniel couldn't shake her words. What if Maggie hadn't been entirely innocent? What if the line between victim and perpetrator was blurrier than anyone wanted to admit? His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous email. "You're making a mistake. Stop before it's too late." Daniel stared at the screen, his pulse pounding. Whoever had been watching Maggie all those years ago might now be watching him, and he wasn't about to stop. The deeper Daniel dug, the more the story unraveled into something far more complicated than a simple abduction. One night, surrounded by stacks of old police files in his motel room, he came across a report his father had written in 2001, 3 years after the disappearance, when the case had already gone cold. It mentioned a series of child abductions in southern Vermont between 1995 and 1998, all within a 50-mile radius of Brattleboro. Daniel frowned, cross-referencing dates and locations. The patterns were chillingly clear. Maggie's class trip happened just weeks after the last reported abduction. When he showed the report to Kelly the next morning, her reaction was immediate. "Why wasn't this part of the official narrative?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "This could mean Maggie wasn't just a victim, she was investigating something. Or she was in the wrong place at the wrong time," Daniel added grimly. But then came another revelation. Kelly had quietly run Maggie's phone records from the months before her disappearance. One number kept showing up, a burner phone that belonged to a man named Charles Dufresne, who'd been arrested in 1999 for his role in a child trafficking ring operating out of New Hampshire. Daniel felt his stomach twist. "Are you saying Maggie had contact with someone connected to that ring? Or she was tracking him?" Kelly countered. "Either way, this connects her to people capable of making an entire busload of kids disappear." It was a horrifying thought. Maggie, the adored teacher, deliberately walking into the orbit of predators. But why? Later that afternoon, they drove out to the town archives to look for any mention of Dufresne and his associates. The archive building smelled of dust and mildew, its wooden floors creaking beneath their steps. Daniel found an old newspaper clipping about Dufresne's arrest. It mentioned a cabin in the Green Mountains where victims were allegedly taken, but investigators had never found it. As they were leaving, an older man sitting by the records desk called out, "You're looking into the Reynolds case, aren't you?" Daniel froze. "And you are?" The man introduced himself as Frank Harlow, a former logger who had lived near the rest stop back in '98. "I told the police back then what I saw, but nobody believed me," he said, his voice rough with age. Kelly raised an eyebrow. "What exactly did you see?" Frank leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That teacher, Maggie. She wasn't taken. She walked into the woods with those kids, like she knew where she was going." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You're saying she wasn't forced?" "Didn't look forced to me," Frank said. "She was leading them, calm as you please. Kids followed her like little ducks." Kelly exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Why didn't anyone follow up on this?" Frank chuckled bitterly. "Cops back then said I was drunk, but I know what I saw. And if you want my advice, stop digging. That place out there, it's better left buried. They left the archives with more questions than answers." Driving back, Daniel couldn't stop replaying Frank's words. Maggie leading the kids into the woods willingly. It didn't fit with the picture of a terrified woman running from a predator. It painted her as someone who had a plan. "Maybe she knew exactly where she was going," Daniel muttered. Kelly tapped the steering wheel. "If she did, that means she wasn't just hiding. She was taking them somewhere she thought they'd be safe. But safe from what? And why hadn't they come back?" That night, Daniel went through Maggie's diary again, looking for anything that might point to a location. One entry caught his eye. "The cabin is still there. No one else knows. It's the only way." The cabin. Daniel leaned back, the weight of the words sinking in. She had an escape plan, he whispered, and if that cabin still existed, it might hold the answers no one had found in 25 years. But as Daniel considered what it meant, his phone buzzed. Another anonymous email. "You're getting too close. Stop now." He stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. They weren't going to stop. Not now. Finding the cabin meant they needed more than old records and cryptic diary entries. They needed someone who knew those woods better than anyone. That brought them back to Frank Harlow. Daniel and Kelly met him at his weathered farmhouse on the edge of Brattleboro. The place smelled of smoke and pine, with a cluttered porch full of rusted tools. Frank greeted them with a wary squint, his flannel shirt stained from years of labor. "I already told you what I saw," he said gruffly, leaning on the doorframe. Daniel stepped forward. "We need more than that. You lived near the rest stop. You said Maggie walked into the woods like she knew where she was going. Where would she go?" Frank sighed, spitting into the dirt. "You don't get it. Those woods go on for miles. There are old campsites, hunting cabins, most of them abandoned now, could be anywhere." "But you know them," Kelly pressed. "If there's a cabin Maggie could have known about, we need you to take us there." Frank chuckled bitterly. "And why the hell would I do that? So you can stir up whatever trouble she got herself into?" "No thanks." Daniel's voice hardened. "Frank, 8 kids vanished. My father spent years chasing ghosts because no one told the whole truth. If you know something that could finally bring closure to those families, you owe it to them to help us." Frank studied him for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he turned, muttering, "You people never learn." But when they met him at dawn the next day, Frank was waiting with his old pickup truck, a rifle slung over his shoulder. The drive out was tense, silence broken only by the hum of the engine. Eventually, they left the pavement for a narrow logging road choked with weeds. Frank parked where the path ended. "From here, we walk," he said. The forest swallowed them whole, the autumn canopy casting long shadows over the damp earth. Daniel felt the weight of every step, the air thick with the smell of decaying leaves. After nearly an hour, Frank stopped. "This is where I saw her. That day." Daniel scanned the clearing. "You're sure?" "I remember like it was yesterday," Frank said, his voice quieter now. "She wasn't running. Wasn't panicked. She was leading them, like she'd done it before." Kelly frowned. "Done it before?" Frank shrugged. "Look, people don't just wander into these woods. You either know where you're going, or you don't come out." They continued on, Frank leading them through thickets until the forest opened into a hollow. There, half hidden by overgrown brush, stood a crumbling wooden cabin. Daniel's chest tightened. This has to be it. The place looked abandoned for decades, roof sagging, windows boarded, the door hanging by a single hinge. But as Daniel stepped closer, he felt it, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Old blankets were piled in one corner, a rusty lantern on the floor. It wasn't much, but it had once been a refuge. "Someone lived here," Kelly murmured, brushing her fingers over the dusty surfaces. Daniel's eyes fell on faint carvings in the wall, initials, J.M., E.C., R.C. His breath caught. Jason Miller, Emma Clark, Rachel Cooper. "The kids were here," he said. Frank shifted uncomfortably. "This place gives me the creeps. You got what you came for. I'm heading back." Before they could protest, he disappeared into the trees, leaving them in the cabin's eerie silence. Daniel knelt by the initials, tracing them with his fingers. She brought them here. But why? Kelly crouched beside him. To hide them. From whoever she thought was after them. Daniel nodded slowly, but another question gnawed at him. If Maggie had kept them safe here, why hadn't anyone come back? Before they left, Kelly spotted something wedged under a loose floorboard. She pried it open, revealing a folded page, yellowed with age. It was Maggie's handwriting. "They're close. I can hear them at night. If I don't make it back, at least the kids will know I tried." Daniel read the words twice, his throat tight. She wasn't running, she was fighting. And now, after 25 years, it was clear. Maggie Reynolds hadn't been a teacher who failed to protect her students. She had been a woman up against something far bigger than anyone realized. And whatever, or whoever she was hiding from was still out there. The next morning, Daniel could hardly sit still. The cabin had changed everything. It wasn't just a dead end. It was a thread, one that, if pulled hard enough, could unravel 25 years of silence. Kelly met him outside a local diner with a large thermos of coffee and a folder tucked under her arm. "I stayed up half the night cross-referencing missing cabin reports and old search maps," she said as they walked to her car. "Guess what? That hollow where Frank took us wasn't even part of the original search grid back in '98. They never came close." Daniel clenched his jaw. "So Maggie could have kept them hidden for days, weeks even." "Or longer," Kelly added. "If she had supplies." The thought made Daniel's chest tighten. Then where did they go? What happened after she was gone? They didn't have answers yet, but they had direction. Armed with the coordinates Frank had shown them, Kelly filed a quiet request for drone imaging of the surrounding forest. When the footage came in, one spot stood out, a clearing just a mile from the cabin, partially overgrown but with unnatural shapes poking through the foliage. By noon, Daniel and Kelly were hiking again, their boots sinking into damp soil as the forest swallowed them. The air smelled of pine and rot, the kind of mix that clung to your skin. Daniel's pulse quickened when they reached the clearing. It wasn't just a cabin this time. It was a camp, or what had been one. 4 small structures, long abandoned, stood in a crooked circle. A stone fire pit sat in the center, choked with weeds. Daniel could almost imagine the voices of children echoing here, laughter dulled by the heavy canopy above. Kelly knelt by one of the cabins, brushing away leaves from a rusted tin cup. They lived here. At least for a while. Daniel entered the largest structure cautiously. Inside, the walls were covered with faint scratches, some spelling out names, initials like those in the first cabin. One message, written in larger, uneven letters, sent a chill down his spine. "We wait for you, Ms. R." Daniel's throat tightened. "The kids wrote this," he whispered. Kelly stepped inside behind him. "They waited for her to come back. But she didn't," Daniel said, his voice low. "She never made it." In another corner, beneath a collapsed cot, Kelly found a bundle of belongings wrapped in a faded blanket. Small shoes, a cracked watch, a stuffed animal missing an eye. Relics of children who had once clung to this place as their last safe haven. And then came the biggest find, another loose plank beneath the floorboards. Daniel pried it up with trembling hands and revealed a second journal, smaller than Maggie's diary. He opened it carefully. The first entry was dated October 15th, 1998, 4 days after the disappearance. "Ms. R said we have to stay quiet. She says the bad men are looking for us. Jason says we should go back, but she says no, it's not safe. Emma cries at night. I miss my mom." The entries stopped abruptly after October 20th. 5 days, Kelly murmured. They were here at least 5 days after they vanished. Daniel stared at the journal. And then nothing. No more entries, no signs of them leaving on their own. The silence of the camp pressed in around them. Every creak of the wooden walls, every gust of wind through the trees felt like the ghosts of those lost voices. Kelly broke the stillness. "Daniel, this wasn't just Maggie hiding them. This was survival, and she was terrified they'd be found." Daniel's mind raced. If the kids survived for at least 5 days, what happened after? Did they try to leave? Were they taken? Outside, Laura Reynolds had come with them. and when she stepped into the clearing, she froze. Her hands went to her mouth, and her knees nearly buckled. "She brought them here," she whispered, tears spilling down her face. "She really tried to protect them." Daniel approached her carefully. "She did more than anyone could have imagined. Your sister gave everything to keep them safe." Laura touched the wall where the children's message was carved. "But she didn't come back for them," she said softly. Daniel didn't have the heart to say what he was thinking. She probably couldn't. As they prepared to leave, Kelly snapped photos of everything, every carving, every artifact. "We're going to get answers," she promised Laura. But as Daniel glanced back at the camp one last time, a gnawing thought took root. If Maggie Reynolds had sacrificed everything for those kids, then someone still out there, had made sure her efforts were in vain. And they weren't done hiding the truth. Back in Brattleboro, Daniel sat in Kelly's office, staring at the evidence board they had hastily assembled. Photos of the cabin, scans of Maggie's diary, and excerpts from the children's brief journal were pinned together with red string connecting timelines and names. It was chaos, but it was finally forming a picture, one Daniel couldn't ignore. "The pieces line up," Kelly said, pacing the room. "The burner number Maggie called belongs to Charles Dufresne, a known trafficker. He wasn't just some stranger, he's the common thread." Daniel rubbed his temples. If Maggie knew him, she wasn't just a scared teacher. She was investigating, maybe even trying to stop him. Or, Kelly countered, she made a deal with him. We don't know which yet. Daniel turned sharply. "You think Maggie was involved?" Kelly sighed. "I don't want to. But people don't call child traffickers by accident. And if she knew where to take those kids, she might have been deeper in this than anyone realized." The thought made Daniel's stomach turn. Maggie as an accomplice? It clashed with everything her diary suggested, her fear, her desperate attempts to protect the children. Or maybe, Daniel said slowly, she wasn't working with him. Maybe she was trying to expose him. She finds out he's targeting her students, and instead of going to the police because she didn't trust them, she decides to hide the kids herself. Kelly stopped pacing. Which means she knew the police couldn't protect them, or wouldn't. That idea sat heavy in the room. Laura arrived soon after, her face pale from lack of sleep. Daniel walked her through their findings, the diary entries, the journal, the connection to Dufresne. "So you're telling me," she said, her voice trembling, "that my sister wasn't just a victim? That she, what? Took on a trafficking ring by herself?" "Not by choice," Daniel said gently. "She knew something, Laura, something big. And she knew they'd come for the kids." Laura sat down hard, covering her face. "She told me she was tired. That's all she said. I should have pushed her. I should have—" Daniel cut her off. "Don't. She didn't tell you because she didn't want you in danger." Kelly pulled a folder from her desk. "There's more. I dug into Dufresne's old associates. Most are dead or in prison, but one, Peter Lynch, still lives less than an hour from here. He was suspected of being the ring's enforcer, but charges didn't stick. If anyone knows what happened, it's him." Laura's eyes widened. "You're going to talk to him?" "We don't have a choice," Daniel said. That evening they drove to a dilapidated trailer park outside Keene, New Hampshire. The place smelled of gasoline and despair. Lynch's trailer sat at the far end, its windows boarded with duct tape, a chain-link fence barely keeping out the world. Kelly rested her hand on her holstered weapon. "Stay behind me," she whispered. Peter Lynch answered the door with a scowl, his frame still intimidating despite his age. His right arm bore faded tattoos of a serpent coiling around a dagger. "What do you want?" he growled. Daniel didn't waste time. "Maggie Reynolds, 1998, Brattleboro." Lynch's eyes narrowed. "Don't know her." Kelly stepped forward. "Then you won't mind if we ask some questions at the station?" For a long moment it seemed he might slam the door in their faces. But then he smirked. She was brave. I'll give her that. Thought she could outsmart us. Daniel's chest tightened. What did you do to her? Lynch's grin widened. Nothing I haven't done before. She didn't want to give up the kids, so she paid the price. Daniel's fists clenched. And the children? What happened to them? Lynch leaned on the doorframe, clearly enjoying the control. Some ran. Some were taken back. Woods don't keep people safe forever, but Maggie, she died thinking she'd won. The words felt like a dagger. Kelly took a step forward. Where's the rest of them? Where's their grave? Lynch chuckled darkly. Grave? You think the Woods keep secrets? They don't. Not forever. It was all he would say. They left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Maggie hadn't betrayed the kids. She died protecting them. Back in the car, Daniel's voice was low. She fought them. She gave her life for them. But they still got some of the kids. Kelly stared out at the dark highway. Then some might have survived. Maybe longer than anyone thought. The possibility hung between them, hope and horror in equal measure. And for Daniel, it was no longer just about solving a cold case. It was about finishing what Maggie started. The next week felt like a blur. Daniel couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the image of Maggie Reynolds leading those terrified children into the woods, knowing death was chasing them. Her last act hadn't been one of desperation. It had been one of defiance. She'd given her life trying to keep them out of the hands of predators like Lynch and Dufresne. But the story didn't end with her. Daniel poured everything into writing it, crafting not just an article but a chronicle, a full account of Maggie's courage, the children's final days at the hidden camp, and the horrifying truth about the trafficking network that had haunted Vermont's backroads in the late 90s. He included Maggie's words from her diary, the children's scribbled journal entries, and even Lynch's chilling confession. It wasn't sensationalism. It was the truth. When he sent the draft to Kelly, she called within minutes. This isn't just a story. It's a reckoning, she said. You're giving those families something they've been denied for 25 years. Answers. Laura came to his motel the next evening. She held the printed article in her hands, her eyes red from crying. You gave her back to me, she whispered. All these years, they made her out to be negligent or worse, but now the world will know she was a hero. Daniel didn't feel like a hero himself. The truth had brought some peace, but it also left jagged edges, questions that might never be answered. What happened to the children after Maggie's death? Did any of them survive for longer? Could someone have saved them if the search had gone just 1 mile further? But some questions had been answered, and that was enough, for now. When the story went live on his publication site, it spread faster than Daniel could have imagined. National outlets picked it up. Talk shows requested interviews with him, Laura, even Kelly. But Daniel didn't care about the spotlight. All he cared about was that Maggie's name was finally cleared. 2 days later, a small vigil was held in Brattleboro. Dozens of people gathered outside Greenfield Middle School, candles in hand, to honor Maggie and the children. Parents who had once cursed her name now wept openly, whispering prayers of gratitude for the woman who had tried to save their kids. Laura spoke briefly, her voice trembling but steady. For 25 years, my sister was called a coward, but now we know the truth. Maggie Reynolds gave her life for those children. She fought when no one else would. She was braver than anyone ever knew. Daniel stood in the crowd, silently watching, feeling the weight of everything that had been uncovered and everything still left in the dark. That night, as he packed his things to leave Vermont, Kelly stopped by his motel room. "So what's next for you?" she asked. Daniel paused. "I don't know, but I can't stop here. There are too many stories like this, people forgotten, buried under rumors and lies. My dad spent years trying to get answers for these families. Now it's my turn." Kelly smiled faintly. "Then maybe we'll work together again." Before leaving town, Daniel visited the hidden camp one last time. He walked among the rotting cabins, imagining the kids' small voices echoing through the trees. He left a single candle on the old fire pit and whispered, "You weren't forgotten, not anymore." As he walked back to his car, he felt a strange mix of grief and resolve. He couldn't bring them back, but he could make sure their story lived on, that Maggie's sacrifice meant something. When he finally published the extended version of his investigation as a feature piece, he ended it with a simple message. For 25 years, the truth was buried in these woods, but Maggie Reynolds didn't die in vain. She saved those children from something unspeakable. This is for her and for them. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from survivors of similar cases, from families still searching for their missing loved ones, and Daniel knew this wasn't the end of his work. It was just the beginning. If you were moved by this story and want to hear more untold cases like this, make sure to subscribe and click the suggested video on your screen to continue uncovering hidden truths.